Welcome to the Lore Vault, a quiet corner of the night where stories breathe slowly and forgotten names rise like mist. Tonight, I open a page dedicated to Casca, the silver rose of a fallen age. Beautiful, fragile, and razor bright, she bloomed on the battlefield with a strength that defied the world, yet carried a loneliness that even her armor could not hide. This is a tale of loyalty that isolates, of a self fractured by love and destiny, and of a heart struggling to endure in a realm crushed by ambition and demons. A silver rose, born in war, and the shards left behind when the night finally broke. So settle in, let your breathing soften, and close your eyes as we begin her story. She was still a child when the world first tried to decide her fate for her. A nameless girl in a nameless village, shaped by hunger, cold nights, and the quiet understanding that some lives were simply meant to be stepped on. She had no armor then, no sword, no concept of strength beyond enduring whatever the next day demanded. And yet somewhere beneath the fear, there lived a small stubborn ember, the instinct to keep moving, to keep existing, even when existence felt like a burden. That faint ember was the only thing she carried with her on the day the nobleman's caravan arrived, on the day she learned that her life could be taken from her as easily as breath. There was no heroism in her struggle, no triumphant defiance. She was overpowered quickly, pinned beneath hands that treated her like property, like nothing at all. Her cries were swallowed by the wind. She remembered the dirt under her nails, the cold bite of helplessness, the crushing certainty that she would disappear here and the world would not change. And then a voice, clear and cold as steel, cut through the chaos. Griffith stood there, pale as moonlight, with eyes that held no fear and no haste. He did not charge in. He did not fight for her. Instead, he looked at her, truly looked, and in that single glance, something in her was acknowledged, something was seen. Then the sword fell, not into his hand, but to her feet. The steel struck the earth beside her with a sharp, ringing finality, as if announcing a verdict. She stared at it, confused, trembling, unable to comprehend why a stranger would offer her a weapon instead of salvation. Griffith's gaze told her the truth before his words could. No one is coming to save you. Not him, not the world. If she wanted to live, she would have to choose life herself. And if she wanted dignity, she would have to seize it with her own bleeding hands. In that suspended moment, fear and shame twisted inside her like a storm. She had never held a sword. She had never killed. But the alternative was to remain a thing, something acted upon, something discarded. Her fingers reached for the hilt, shaking so violently she could barely close her grip. The nobleman lunged toward her, enraged by the break in his authority, and her instinct, that ember of life she had carried for so long, surged upward like a scream. The blade rose. What happened next was not graceful. It was not the strike of a warrior. It was wild, desperate, fueled by terror and the refusal to vanish. But it was enough. Steel met flesh, and the nobleman fell back with a cry, blood blooming across his fine clothes. Casca's breath tore from her chest as if she had been underwater for years. The world tilted, narrowed, then snapped into a clarity she had never known. She had chosen herself. She had taken her life back with her own hands. That was the climax, not the killing, but the realization that she had the power to kill, the power to defend, the power to exist as more than prey. And Griffith, watching her with unreadable calm, stepped forward only when the danger had passed. "If you want a place," he said quietly, "come with me. Not as a rescued victim, not as a charity case, but as someone who had proven the will to survive." Casca's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She wanted to cry, to collapse, to disappear into the relief of being alive. But something deeper held her upright, the understanding that this boy in white had not saved her life. He had handed her the right to save it herself. From that moment on, loyalty grew within her like a vow sealed in bone. She believed Griffith had granted her more than survival. He had given her a destiny, a path, a way to transcend the small, frightened girl she had been. He was not a hero to her. He was a horizon, a dream she could follow, sharpen herself against, devote her entire being to. She owed him everything she would one day become. And in the quiet that followed the chaos, as she walked beside the band of the Hawk for the first time, she felt the echo of that decision in every step. The sword still weighed heavy in her hands, but it was no longer a foreign object. It was a promise that she would never again be powerless, never again live as someone else's possession. Griffin had offered her a door, and she had stepped through it, drenched in blood and trembling with the shock of transformation. She did not yet know the cost that path would demand. She did not know how tightly loyalty could bind, or how deeply devotion could wound. All she knew was that she had chosen life, and that choice had led her to him. In the years that followed, Casca would become more than a soldier, more than a commander, more than the silver rose of the Hawk. But all of it began here, with a girl in the dirt, a sword at her feet, and the terrifying awakening that no one can give you a future unless you are willing to seize it. And as the road stretched before her, she followed Griffith with a heart still raw, still shaken, but burning with purpose, because he had not saved her. He had done something far more dangerous. He had shown her that she could save herself. She grew into her role slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way dawn becomes day, without announcing where the light truly began. When Casca first joined the band of the Hawk, she was simply another sword, raw, unpolished, brimming with a restless need to prove that the choice she made on that distant hill had meant something. But time, battle, and the relentless rhythm of marching beside Griffith forged her into far more than a common soldier. She became the Hawk's second in command, not through favoritism or lineage, but through the weight of her reliability. When others faltered, she remained steady. When others questioned, she stepped forward. Where Griffith's brilliance inspired and dazzled, Casca's discipline held the dream together like tightly drawn threads. Every morning in camp, before the sun had properly risen, her voice carried through the cold air, calling orders, assigning scouts, shaping formation with the precision of someone who understood that survival depended on the smallest details. The mercenaries respected her, sometimes grudgingly, but always sincerely. They knew she did not command from pride. She commanded because no one else would shoulder the burden so completely. She walked the camp as if it were a living thing, whose heartbeat she alone could hear, checking rations, inspecting armor, ensuring injured men were given rest even when they protested. In a world of men who measured strength by force, Casca showed them a different kind of strength, the strength of vigilance, of duty carried without complaint. Griffith, in those days, was the sun around which the Hawk orbited, radiant, untouchable, the embodiment of a dream half divine. Guts, by contrast, was a storm front, unpredictable and raw, a blade that could split battlefields open by sheer will. Between those two forces, Casca became the still point, the tempering steel that prevented the hawk from tearing itself apart. If Griffith soared too far into ambition, she translated his vision into practical steps the soldiers could follow. If Guts destabilized the battlefield with his reckless ferocity, Casca restored order behind him, shoring up the line, gathering the wounded, anchoring the momentum he created. She understood both men in ways they did not understand themselves. Griffith's loneliness disguised as divinity, and Guts's yearning for purpose disguised as violence. Her presence steadied the camp in quieter ways too. When disputes rose, she cut through them firmly, sometimes harshly, but always with a fairness that left no lingering resentment. When a young recruit lost his nerve before battle, she spoke to him not like a commander, but like someone who had once known fear intimately. And when the veteran soldiers boasted too loudly of their victories, she reminded them of the cost that each triumph carried. In her, the band of the hawk found its spine, rigid enough to stand, flexible enough to bear weight. Yet beneath the armor, Casca remained the silver rose, sharp-edged, beautiful in her ferocity, but still carrying the softness she refused to expose. The battlefield knew her as the woman who could cleave through enemy ranks with unflinching precision, but nights by the fire revealed a different truth. When the others laughed or drank, she often sat a little apart, sharpening her sword, plucking thorns from her thoughts one by one. No one noticed how her eyes lingered on Griffith when he addressed the troops, or how her breath stilled each time he entrusted her with a task. Her devotion was quiet, disciplined, and painfully contained, like a flame burning inside a metal lantern. There were moments, rare and unguarded, when she let the mask slip, not fully, just enough to reveal the loneliness that lived beneath her stern exterior. During long marches when dusk bled across the plains, she wondered whether Griffith ever saw her as more than the sword he had created. She wondered if the soldiers truly respected her, or merely obeyed the sharpness of her tone. She wondered why, even surrounded by comrades, she still felt the same hollow ache she had known as a girl. But she buried these questions under layers of duty. Better to be indispensable than uncertain. Better to be strong than exposed. Still, the truth remained. Casca longed for recognition, not praise but acknowledgement. She wanted someone to see her, not as the Hawk's commander, not as Griffith's loyal shadow, but as a person who struggled, who desired, who carried quiet hopes beneath her armor. But the world she lived in had no room for such vulnerability. So she held herself tightly, sculpted by discipline and sharpened by expectation. Her emotions became weapons she learned to sheath for the sake of the dream she served. On the battlefield, she moved with a grace that struck fear into enemies and admiration into allies. She was not the strongest, not the fastest, but she was the most unyielding. When the lines trembled, she was there. When confusion threatened to unravel formation, she restored it with a shout or a strike. And when victory came, she accepted it with the solemnity of someone who knew triumph was fragile, a flower blooming briefly amid blood and smoke. Griffith often praised her reliability, calling her his right hand, his anchor, the one who kept the hawk aloft when ambition pulled too high or danger dragged too low. These words fed her devotion, gave her the illusion of closeness she sought, but they also deepened her burden. To be indispensable meant to never falter, never hesitate, never reveal the tremors of doubt that sometimes shook her heart. To be Griffith's right hand was to live in constant tension, honored yet unseen, essential yet replaceable in the way all tools eventually are. Guts' arrival intensified that tension. He shattered the delicate balance of the hawk simply by being who he was. Raw power, unrefined instinct, the embodiment of freedom that Casca herself had never known. She resented him at first, resented how effortlessly he drew Griffith's attention, how he fought with a wildness that contradicted all her notions of discipline. But beneath the resentment was something more dangerous: recognition. He too bore invisible scars. He too carried loneliness behind a wall of strength. And while she tried to deny it, some part of her sensed that he understood her in ways Griffith never would. Still, Casca clung to her role. She had become the band's quiet pillar, the one who ensured they did not crumble, even as the world shifted around them. She believed this purpose was enough. She believed she needed nothing more than Griffith's dream to keep her moving. But late at night, when the fire burned low and her armor lay at her side, she wondered if a life defined entirely by another's ambition could ever truly satisfy the tender, hidden heart beating inside her chest. For now, she buried that question. There were battles to fight, men to lead, a dream to chase. She was the silver rose, unyielding, necessary, beloved in silence. And even if no one saw the thorns she carried, she would continue to carry them, because this was the life she had chosen the moment she lifted that sword from the dirt. A life of strength, a life of service, a life of longing, wrapped in steel. She noticed him long before she ever understood him. From the moment Guts joined the Band of the Hawk, Casca felt something tighten inside her, a sharp, unwelcome tension that had nothing to do with the battlefield. He arrived like a force of nature, a wandering blade whose raw strength disrupted the delicate balance she had fought years to maintain. Griffith looked at him with that rare, luminous interest, the kind Casca had spent so long earning through sweat and unswerving loyalty. Guts became the center of Griffith's attention in a matter of weeks, while she had bled and endured for years to stand at Griffith's side. And so her first feeling toward him was not curiosity or admiration, but jealousy that cut deeper than she dared admit. Guts was everything she wasn't: reckless where she was disciplined, wild where she was controlled, instinctive where she was deliberate. He charged into battle with a brutality that made strategy seem irrelevant, carving through enemies as though his life depended on the next swing and not the greater plan. To Casca, who lived and breathed the structure of warfare, he was infuriating, a lone wolf disrupting the harmony she fought to maintain. Worse still, Griffin trusted him, Griffin needed him, and that truth settled like a stone in Casca's ribs. How could a man who had just joined earn what she had worked so long to deserve? She tried at first to hate him for it. She scolded him publicly, lectured him on discipline, glared at him across the campfire. But Guts, stubborn and oblivious, refused to acknowledge the reason behind her anger. He took her hostility as challenge, not insight. They clashed in words, in glances, in the silent friction between two people who did not yet understand the shape of the other's wounds. And beneath that friction, something unspoken flickered, something neither of them recognized or wanted to. It changed the night they fell from the cliff. Casca was already exhausted, weakened by fever, weakened further by the vulnerability she hated most, her own body betraying her. When she awoke in the cave, stripped of armor, stripped of her usual defenses, The fury she unleashed on Guts was fierce, because it was the only shield she had left. She raged, accused, lashed out, because anger was safer than fear. But Guts did not meet her anger with cruelty. He sat with her through the fever, kept her warm when the cold crept into her bones, held her steady when she wanted to pretend she didn't need anyone. In that small, dim cave carved into the cliffside, where no rank or duty existed, Casca realized for the first time that Guts was not the enemy she had painted in her heart. He listened to her, truly listened, when she told him her story, the sword at her feet, the dream she had tied her life to. Guts did not pity her, nor did he idealize her. He simply understood. He understood what it meant to find purpose in another person's shadow. He understood the burden of being shaped by someone else's will. He understood the ache of wanting recognition, not as a soldier, but as a human being. And in the quiet that stretched between them, Casca felt seen in a way she had not expected, not by Griffith, whose gaze was fixed on a castle in the sky, but by the man beside her, who had his own scars carved deep into his spirit. When they fought together the next day, something subtle had shifted, their movements aligned, not perfectly, but instinctively. Two people who no longer resisted each other, but resonated. Casca was forced to admit that Guts was not only strong, he was reliable. He fought not for glory, but for survival, for something raw and honest. And that honesty was the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart. But the true turning point came during the infamous Battle of the 100 Men. Guts charged into impossible odds alone, as he always had. But for the first time, Casca felt more than frustration at his recklessness. She felt fear, not for the band, not for the dream, for him. She waited in the forest, gripping her sword with white-knuckled tension, pacing the earth until it wore beneath her feet. Every sound from the trees snapped her breath short. Every moment he did not return stretched into something unbearable. It was only then, in the agony of waiting, that she understood how deeply her heart had already moved toward him. When she found him, bloodied and exhausted, surrounded by the bodies of men who had tried to kill him, her relief was so fierce it nearly broke her. She wanted to shout at him, to scold him for his recklessness, to hide how badly she had feared losing him, but all she could do was help him stand, shoulder his weight, and feel the quiet thrum of his heartbeat against her own. It was the moment she knew that her loyalty, once simple, once singular, had begun to divide. Griffith had been her son, distant and brilliant, but Guts was something different entirely, a warmth she could touch, a presence that met her heart at eye level instead of towering above it. This realization terrified her. Casca had built her life on unwavering devotion to one man. Griffith had given her purpose, identity, survival. To feel something for Guts, something tender, unsteady, dangerous, was to threaten everything she had ever believed she owed. The closer she grew to Guts, the more sharply she felt the fracture widening inside her, the part of her bound to Griffith's dream, and the part of her drawn to the fragile human warmth Guts offered, without realizing it. They shared glances they didn't know how to hold, silences they didn't know how to break. Their bond grew not through grand declarations, but through battlefield glances, shared burdens, and the quiet understanding between two people who knew how it felt to fight for a dream that wasn't truly theirs. Guts challenged her, softened her, saw her, and Casca, who had spent years hiding behind strength, felt exposed, but also alive, in Guts. She found not a rival, but a mirror, someone who carried loneliness the way she did, someone who wanted to be needed, not just used, someone who made her question the life she had accepted as unchangeable. And this was the beginning of the fracture that would shape everything that followed. The dawning truth that the heart does not remain loyal to dreams. It remains loyal to the hands that reach out when you're shivering in the dark. Casca's loyalty was not a choice, nor a duty, nor a virtue she consciously cultivated. It was something far deeper, something that lived in the marrow of her being, a structure of identity built around a single moment, a single gesture, a single boy with moonlit eyes who offered her not rescue, but permission to exist. From the instant Griffith threw the sword at her feet, her life stopped belonging to the frightened girl who had cowered in the dirt. A new life began, one shaped entirely around the person who had shown her that she could stand, fight, and claim her own breath. For Casca, loyalty was less a decision and more an existential tether. Everything she became afterward grew from the belief that Griffith had given her a self worth having. Before him, she had been nobody, not by choice, but by the quiet cruelty of circumstance. A world that did not see value in a poor village girl except as property, as labor, as a body to be used or sold. Her childhood had taught her that survival was a matter of endurance, not dignity. When the nobleman tried to take her, he did it with the certainty of someone who believed the world agreed with him, and the world likely did. In that moment, Casca's life was a blank page on which others wrote freely. But Griffith's intervention shattered that narrative. He did not strike down the nobleman or shield her behind him. That would have made her a victim he rescued, a story in which she played a passive role. Instead, he offered her a sword, a tool of agency, of defiance, of choice. He forced upon her the terrifying responsibility of action, and in doing so, planted the seed of a new identity. She killed for the first time, not because she wanted power, but because she wanted to be the author of her own survival. And Griffith, pale and composed, acknowledged her not as a helpless girl, but as a person capable of shaping her own fate. It was this acknowledgement that became the foundation of her devotion. Griffith did not simply save her life, he defined it, or more precisely, he created the conditions under which she could define it herself. In her mind, every step she took afterward, every command she followed, every battlefield she crossed, all of it originated from that single transformative moment. Her loyalty was not gratitude, it was ontology. To betray Griffith would be to betray the core of who she believed herself to be. This is why Casca's loyalty was absolute. It was embedded in her identity. She built her sense of self around him, like a planet orbiting a sun. Griffith was not just a leader to her, he was the gravitational center around which her life spun. His dream became the direction her feet walked, his vision the purpose she carried, his glory the light in which she saw meaning. Without him, she feared she would collapse back into the formless shadow she had been before. The Band of the Hawk gave her structure, purpose, camaraderie, but Griffith gave her existence meaning. She believed that everything she accomplished, every soldier who respected her, every victory she contributed to, every responsibility she bore, was possible only because Griffith had allowed her to become someone capable of those things. Her strength was her own, yes, but she felt its root lay in him, as though without his initial spark, she would never have discovered the fire within herself. For many, loyalty is a matter of honor or principle. For Casca, it was the scaffolding that held her identity upright. This is why her attachment to Griffith bordered on spiritual. He was the one who made her feel seen in a world that had always turned away. She projected onto him a narrative in which her life mattered only insofar as it served his dream, a dream vast enough to eclipse her own desires, her own fears, even her own humanity. Griffith, for his part, was not unaware of the effect he had on those drawn to him. His charisma was both natural and deliberate, the kind of radiance that pulled others toward him like moths to a flame. But unlike the others, Casca's devotion was not merely admiration, it was existential dependence. She believed her selfhood was intertwined with his destiny. If Griffith rose, she rose. If he fell, she fell. And because she could not imagine herself outside of his light, she never questioned whether such dependence was dangerous. It became dangerous the moment Guts appeared. Guts was different. He entered Casca's life not by reshaping her identity, but by recognizing it. Where Griffith had given her existence meaning through vision, Guts gave her meaning through attention. He saw her not merely as a soldier or subordinate, but as a person with fears, hopes, burdens, and desires. And this terrified her because it introduced the possibility that she could exist independently of Griffith's design. Guts did not ask her to orbit anything. He stood beside her as an equal. This was the first fracture in the clean, monolithic structure of her loyalty. She had always believed her life belonged to Griffith alone. But now, for the first time, she felt something pull her away from that center. Something warm, something slow, something unmistakably human. And yet the thought of stepping off that orbit, even slightly, filled her with guilt, so profound it bordered on shame. Loving Guts meant acknowledging that Griffith had not given her everything. It meant admitting that a part of her longed for something outside of the dream she had sworn to uphold. But the real tragedy of Casca's loyalty lies not in the conflict between Griffith and Guts, but in the emptiness that existed beneath that loyalty. Casca believed that without Griffith, she was nothing, that the strength she wielded, the authority she carried, the respect she earned, all originated from him and not from herself. This belief made her devotion absolute, and it made her vulnerable in ways she could never see. When Griffith fell, her identity fell with him. When he broke, she broke. When he rose again as something inhuman, her very soul shattered. Because the person she had built her existence around no longer existed. Griffith's transformation into Femto was not only the destruction of the band, it was the annihilation of Casca's selfhood. She had tied her identity so tightly to his humanity that when he discarded that humanity, he discarded her too, not out of malice, but out of indifference. The dream no longer needed her. The sun she had orbited became a black hole. And so, when her mind finally collapsed into the quiet void of the Elaine persona, it was not simply trauma that pulled her under. It was the existential truth that without Griffith's light, she no longer knew who she was. Her loyalty had been her identity, and when that loyalty was betrayed, her identity dissolved. To lose Griffith was not to lose a leader. It was to lose the foundation of her existence. It was to lose herself. And this is the nature of Casca's loyalty. Not noble, not dutiful, but fundamentally existential. She did not simply follow Griffith. She was Griffith's follower in the most literal sense of identity. And when the dream that sustained her turned into a nightmare, the fragile structure of her selfhood collapsed into silence. Because for Casca, Losing Griffith did not mean grieving someone she loved. It meant grieving the person she believed she was. Casca's entire life is shaped by a quiet but relentless conflict, the tension between the rose and the silver. These two halves of her nature are not merely symbolic, they shape her behaviors, her desires, her fears, and ultimately her downfall. The rose is everything gentle within her, the longing to be held, to be seen, to be loved for who she is, rather than what she can do. The silver is everything the world demanded from her: armor, discipline, relentless strength, and the refusal to ever appear vulnerable again. To survive, Casca learned to bury the rose beneath the silver, but to live, to truly live, she needed both, and that was the tragedy she never had the freedom to resolve. From childhood, the rose within Casca flickered like a candle in the wind. She longed for warmth, for safety, for the comfort of a world where she could rest without fear. But the world she inhabited offered her no shelter. It taught her early that softness was dangerous, that tenderness could be used against her, and that a girl who showed her heart was a girl easily broken. So the rose went quiet, not dead, never dead, but hidden, pressed beneath layers of instinct and necessity. The silver grew instead, hard, sharp, reflective, a mask she could wear and a shell she could retreat into. When Griffith offered her the sword, it was the silver that first took shape. She realized that strength was not optional, it was survival. The moment she took a life to protect her own, the world forced its lesson upon her. Vulnerability had no place here. The rose could not save her, the silver could, and so she did what countless survivors do. She hardened. She learned to command her fear instead of yielding to it. She learned to fight without hesitation, to lead with authority, and to suppress any sign of weakness. The men of the band respected her strength, not her softness, and so she leaned into the version of herself the world responded to. On the battlefield, the silver was absolute. Casca became a blade herself, honed by discipline, capable of cutting through hesitation and self-doubt. She carried her responsibilities like armor, never letting them slip. Her voice was sharp, her orders precise, her composure unwavering, even when her heart hammered within her chest. The rose in these moments was a distant memory, a luxury she no longer believed she deserved. Every victory, every promotion, every soldier who followed her into danger reinforced the same belief: strength is what makes you worthy. But the rose did not disappear. It lingered beneath the surface like a bruise that never fully healed. In quiet moments, rare, fragile moments, it pushed through the cracks in her armor. When she watched Griffith speak with a dreamer's smile, her heart tightened with longing, not for glory, not for ambition, but for the feeling of being chosen, cherished, essential to someone's life in a way that wasn't tied to battle or duty. She wanted to be held, not just relied on. She wanted to be seen, not just obeyed. These desires frightened her because they exposed the rose she had tried so hard to hide. Griffith never gave space for that part of her. His gaze passed over her with admiration, but never intimacy. He valued her, yes, but as a soldier, a tool, a stabilizing force, never as a woman with a heart aching for acknowledgement. And because Casca had built her world around him, she interpreted his indifference as a flaw within herself rather than a flaw in his capacity to feel. If he didn't choose her, it must mean she wasn't enough. Not strong enough, not exceptional enough. not silver enough, so she worked harder, fought harder, buried the rose deeper. When Guts entered her life, he did something dangerous. He saw the rose, not immediately. At first, he only saw the soldier, the commander whose anger burned as brightly as her loyalty. But the more they clashed, the more he recognized the fractures in her armor. In the cave, when her fever stripped away her defenses, and she lay trembling for warmth she could not command, the rose emerged unshielded, and Guts did not mock it or exploit it. He protected it. He sat beside her through the night, offering not commands or expectations, but presence. He gave her something Griffith never had, permission to be soft. This terrified her. The silver she had built told her that softness was weakness, that vulnerability was dangerous, that allowing someone close was an invitation to pain. But the rose leaned toward Guts with undeniable instinct, recognizing in him the same aching loneliness she carried. He was strong, yes, stronger than anyone she'd ever known, but he wore his wounds plainly. He did not hide behind ambition or composure. He accepted his pain as part of himself, and in doing so, showed Casca a version of strength that did not rely on armor. She despised him for it, at first, because he threatened the structure that had kept her alive. He forced her to confront the truth she had buried beneath the silver. She was tired. She was lonely. She wanted to be held, not just obeyed. She wanted connection, not just duty. And every time she found herself looking at him with unfamiliar warmth, a war ignited inside her, because to embrace the rose was to risk everything the silver had fought to protect. This internal war shaped her interactions with both men. Around Griffins, she hid the rose completely, presenting only the silver. She could not bear the thought of being seen as weak, especially not by him. Griffiths admired strength, so strong she remained. When he praised her, she hardened further. When he overlooked her, she pushed herself relentlessly to earn his attention. The silver wanted his approval. The rose wanted his affection. The silver won every time. But around Guts, the rose stirred. She found herself softening in ways she didn't intend, speaking more gently, worrying more deeply, feeling anger not because he endangered the mission, but because he endangered himself. The silver resented this. It tried to remind her that connection was dangerous, that love was a wound waiting to happen. But the rose refused to be silenced. Not anymore. This tug-of-war rippled through every part of Casca's identity. She no longer knew which version of herself was real. Was she the commander who lived for duty, or the woman who longed for warmth? Was she meant to be a sword, or was she allowed to be a heart as well? These questions gnawed at her, carving spaces of doubt she could not afford to show. And then came the moment of cruel truth. Her heart wanted what her world could not accept. The silver was necessary for survival, but the rose was necessary for joy. To abandon the rose would mean living a life of strength but emptiness. To embrace it would mean risking the only identity she had ever known. Casca's tragedy is that she never learned how to let these two selves coexist. Instead, they tore her apart from within. The silver protected her, but isolated her. The rose soothed her, but exposed her. She oscillated between them until the strain became unbearable. When Griffiths fell, the silver cracked. When he betrayed her, the rose shattered. And when she was reborn as Elaine, it was not because she was weak. It was because no one can survive being pulled in two directions forever. Casca needed both the rose and the silver to be whole. The world allowed her neither. Neither Griffith and Guts stood at opposite ends of Casca's inner world, two gravitational forces shaping her identity, her desires, and the quiet fractures beneath her armor. To understand Casca is to understand the emotional axis she lived upon. Griffith, the unreachable star she orbited with reverence, and Guts, the human warmth she stumbled into, despite every instinct telling her to resist. These two men were not rivals in her mind. They were symbols, embodiments of two futures she could never reconcile. One represented transcendence, a dream bigger than life. The other represented presence, imperfect, wounded, painfully human. And Casca, caught between them, found herself torn in ways she could neither articulate nor escape. From the moment Griffith threw that sword at her feet, he ceased to be merely a boy. He became a purpose. For Casca, Griffith was not a man of flesh and flaws. He was an idea, a shining ideal she built her identity around. His beauty, his confidence, his unshakable ambition, all carried an otherworldly quality that made him feel inaccessible even as he stood beside her. Griffith did not evoke affection in her as much as devotion, a form of awe that bordered on spiritual reverence. He was everything she was not, unafraid, unbroken, radiant. And because he had given her the chance to shape her own fate, she saw him as the very source of her existence. To love Griff was to love a dream, a distant, unyielding dream that demanded sacrifice. He did not ask her for her heart. He commanded it simply by being who he was. She watched him build the Band of the Hawk, not just with strategy, but with charisma, drawing followers with the gravity of a celestial body. She believed she followed him out of loyalty, but the truth was deeper. She followed him because she wanted to be worthy of him. Griff made her feel like she could be more than a frightened village girl. He gave her a place, a role, an identity, and so she worshipped him not out of naivety, but out of profound gratitude. Yet, Griffith's brilliance came with distance. He inspired love but did not return it. He accepted devotion but did not reciprocate vulnerability. Casca could defend him, kill for him, bleed for him, but she could never touch the inner sanctum of his heart. Griffith's dream consumed everything, including the very people who enabled it. Casca understood this on some level, yet she accepted the pain willingly. To her, his dream mattered more than her own desires. She erased her softer self for his sake because she believed that without him, she would revert to nothing. Guts disrupted all of that. Where Griffith was lofty and untouchable, Guts was grounded, painfully real. He did not shine, he burned. He did not inspire dreams, he carried wounds. He did not demand devotion, he simply existed beside her, raw and flawed in ways she could not ignore. The first time she looked at him, she saw arrogance and danger, but the more she watched, the more she saw the quiet loneliness beneath his bravado, the kind of wariness she recognized in herself. Guts did not fight for glory or ambition. He fought because it was the only way he knew how to live. He carried no illusions, no grand speeches, only the weight of survival and the scars that marked him. Casca resented him at first, precisely because he represented everything that threatened her sense of self. His presence pulled Griffith's gaze away from her, and with it, the fragile validation she relied on. But deeper still, Guts challenged the structure of her loyalty. He forced her to confront truths she had buried beneath years of discipline. She was lonely, she longed for connection, and she wanted something more than the cold shine of ambition. The turning point between them was not in battle, but in vulnerability. The night in the cave stripped away their roles, commander and soldier, rival and subordinate, and left only two broken people sharing warmth in the dark. When Casca spoke of her past, Guts didn't respond with admiration or pity. He listened. When she cried out in frustration at the life she had chosen, he didn't lecture her. He simply remained. And when she shivered from fever and exhaustion, he held her with a gentleness she had not felt in years. In that moment, Casca learned something she had never expected. Guts saw her. Not the soldier, not the silver rose, not the loyal shadow of Griffith, but the woman beneath all of it. He didn't treat her as a symbol, or a tool, or a worshiper. He treated her as an equal, and equality was a dangerous gift to someone who had built her entire identity on submission to a dream. The bond that grew between them was not forged through ideals, but through experience. They fought alongside each other, bled beside each other, and carried the same unspoken ache of longing for something more than the lives they'd been given. When Casca waited for Guts during the Battle of 100 Men, the fear that gripped her was unlike anything she had felt for Griffith. It was immediate, visceral, rooted not in devotion, but in personal attachment. She could not imagine losing him, not because he was essential to Griffith's dream, but because he had become essential to her. And this realization fractured her world. Griffith was the star she worshipped. Guts was the fire that warmed her. One asked for loyalty, the other offered understanding. One gave her purpose, the other gave her presence. To choose Guts, even in the quiet recesses of her heart, was to betray everything she believed defined her. It meant admitting that her devotion to Griffith had been built on dependency, not destiny. It meant acknowledging that love did not need grandeur to be real, and it meant recognizing that she deserved a life where she could be held, not just commanded. This internal awakening made Griffith's eventual betrayal devastating in ways no one else could understand. Griffiths had been the foundation of her identity. His fall was not merely the collapse of the Band of the Hawk. It was the collapse of the self she had constructed around him. When he broke, she broke. When he sacrificed them, he sacrificed her sense of meaning. In that moment, all the years of loyalty, worship, and self-denial twisted into a hollow void. She realized that the man she had devoted her life to had never been a god, only a dream she had mistaken for salvation. And the tragedy is that Guts, the one person who could have helped her rebuild herself apart from Griffith, was powerless to protect her from the storm that followed. Casca's heart was pulled between two worlds, and one celestial, cold and consuming, the other human, fragile, and warm. Her fate was sealed the moment she realized she wanted both: to devote herself to a dream and to be loved as a woman. The world of Berserk allowed her neither. In the end, the two men who shaped her were not rivals for her affection, but opposing truths about her existence. Griffith represented who she thought she had to be. Guts represented who she was allowed to be. To love Guts was to reclaim herself. To lose Griffith was to lose the self she had built. And when Griffith betrayed them all, Casca was left standing between the ruins of the dream she worshipped and the unreachable tenderness she had only just begun to understand. A heart split by two extremes, with no place left for it to rest. Casca stands as one of the last anchors of humanity in a world steadily surrendering itself to darkness. When Griffith casts aside his mortal limits to ascend as Femto, he abandons not only the Band of the Hawk, but also every fragile, imperfect thread that once tied him to the human condition. His transformation marks a point of no return, ambition elevated above empathy, destiny elevated above life. In parallel, Guts, consumed by grief and rage, begins slipping toward a different kind of inhumanity, a darkness born not of transcendence, but of suffering. His rage grows teeth, his trauma grows a voice, and the beast within him whispers a promise of power through abandonment of restraint. Between these two extremes, the divine and the monstrous, Casca remains painfully, tragically human. Her humanity is not an idealized purity. It is bruised, fractured, and soaked in the consequences of loyalty and betrayal. But it is real. Unlike Griffith, she never sought to rise above human limits. Unlike Guts, she never surrendered to vengeance. Even in her most broken state, she embodies the vulnerability, fear, and tenderness that the world of Berserk so violently tries to crush. Her regression into the Elaine persona is often seen as a loss, but in truth, it is the last defense of a human spirit, refusing to become something twisted by hatred or ambition. She retreats inward, not to escape reality, but to preserve some small piece of herself from annihilation. Casca's humanity is also expressed in the way she forms connections. She cares in ways that cost her dearly. She feels guilt, affection, grief, and longing with an intensity neither Griffith nor Guts can fully mirror. Griffith loves his dream more than any person. Guts struggles to love anything while fighting against the darkness within him. Casca, however, loves fiercely and painfully, loving others even when it exposes her, even when it threatens the armor she relies on. This emotional openness, fragile as it is, forms the core of her humanity, and it is this same humanity that keeps the story grounded. Without Casca, Berserk risks becoming a tale exclusively about rage, ambition, and the brutal erosion of the self. Casca reminds us that suffering does not always turn a person into a monster. Sometimes it shatters them into silence. Sometimes it leaves them trembling but intact. Sometimes it forces them to retreat in order to endure. Her survival, not as a warrior, but as a soul, counters the narrative gravity pulling other characters toward extremity. In a world defined by demons, apostles, and broken men, Casca's damaged but persistent humanity is the quiet truth the story clings to. She shows that to remain human is not to remain whole, but to remain capable of feeling, even shattered. She holds on to that, and that makes her irreplaceable. If Casca is the last anchor of humanity in Berserk, then her connection to the Moonlight Boy transforms her into something even more delicate and paradoxical, a symbol of life itself, fragile, flickering, and impossibly persistent in a world determined to extinguish it. Where Griffith ascends beyond humanity and Guts grapples with the encroaching beast within, Casca becomes the vessel that holds the remnants of what the world has lost: tenderness, innocence, and the possibility of renewal. It is no coincidence that the child born from the Eclipse, a being forged from both love and tragedy, both purity and demonic corruption, chooses Casca as his mother. Her body, her heart, her very existence becomes the meeting point between two opposing forces, the darkness that consumes and the hope that refuses to die. In this sense, Casca is not merely carrying a child, she is carrying the last luminous thread, connecting what humanity once was and what it might still become. The Moonlight Boy represents a miracle in a narrative defined by ruin. His presence softens the harshness of the world around him. His visits temporarily restore Casca's fragmented mind. His warmth even stills the fury within Guts, and yet his existence is rooted in atrocity, born from Gritty's ascension and the horrors of the Eclipse. Through him, Casca embodies the contradiction at the heart of Berserk, that life can sprout from unbearable darkness, that beauty can grow in the shadow of unimaginable cruelty. Casca herself mirrors this contradiction. Though broken, she does not transform into a creature of vengeance. Though traumatized, she does not surrender her humanity. Her survival alone becomes an act of defiance, proof that the forces seeking to twist or annihilate the human spirit have not succeeded entirely. In her quiet, damaged resilience, she becomes a symbol of life that continues even when stripped of memory, voice, or agency. The world takes almost everything from her, yet something within her refuses to extinguish, and that stubborn spark is the same spark that brought the Moonlight Boy into being. In this way, Casca's role transcends her personal tragedy. She becomes the bridge between what was lost and what might still be reclaimed. While Griffith seeks a perfect world built upon sacrifice, and Guts battles through a world scarred by rage, Casca, simply by existing, represents a possible future neither of them can create alone. She embodies the truth that life's meaning is not found in conquest or vengeance, but in connection, in tenderness, in the fragile bonds that survive even when the world burns them down. Thus, Casca stands not only as the last anchor of humanity, but also as its final seed, a living contradiction, a quiet miracle, and a reminder that even in a world ravaged by ambition and darkness, life persists, and where life persists, so does the faintest possibility of hope. In a world where ambition devours humanity and vengeance threatens to hollow out the soul, Casca becomes the quiet force that prevents Berserk from collapsing entirely into darkness. Her presence, fragile, wounded, and profoundly human, acts as a counterweight to the extremes embodied by Guts and Griffith. Without her, the story risks becoming a tale of unstoppable fury on one side and cold, consuming ambition on the other. Casca anchors both men to the emotional truths they would otherwise abandon. For Guts, she is the tether that keeps him from vanishing into the abyss of rage. The beast of darkness whispers promises of strength through destruction, urging him to sever every bond and surrender to hatred. But Casca is the one thread that keeps him connected to something human. She is not merely someone he cares for. She is the embodiment of everything he stands to lose if he allows vengeance to define him. When he holds her, even in her broken state, he remembers who he once was and who he still hopes to be. Her vulnerability demands gentleness from him, a gentleness that contradicts the monster inside him. And every moment he protects her, he protects the part of himself that refuses to become like the forces that shattered their world. Without Casca, Guts' journey would tilt completely toward annihilation. With her, it remains a struggle for redemption, not just retribution. For Griffith, Casca represents something entirely different, the cost of his dream. While others saw his ascent as destiny, Casca is the living proof of the devastation he left behind. She is the reminder that Griffith's path to godhood required not only sacrifice, but the deliberate destruction of those who loved him. Every glance at her broken form is a mirror held up to the humanity he abandoned and the trust he betrayed. Casca's existence disrupts the perfection of his new world because she embodies everything he had to sever in order to rise. She is the scar his ambition carved into the world, a quiet but undeniable indictment of the dream he pursues without remorse. In this way, Casca is the emotional fulcrum of Berserk. She prevents Griffith's narrative from being admired uncritically by revealing the human cost beneath the shine of ambition, and she prevents Guts's narrative from drowning in wrath by grounding him in tenderness. Between the monstrous and the divine, she stands as the last breath of humanity, a presence that reminds both men of what they are capable of destroying and what they are still capable of saving. Casca does not wield power through force or ambition. Her influence is born from the simple truth of her existence. She matters. She mattered to Guts long before he admitted it, and she mattered to Griffith long before he discarded that truth for a throne. Through her, the story maintains its emotional depth, refusing to let either man fully escape the consequences of the paths they choose. Thus, Casca's role is not merely supportive. She is the axis around which the emotional narratives of both men turn, the proof that humanity, even when broken, continues to shape the destiny of those who would rise above or fall beneath it. Casca's story, taken as a whole, becomes one of the clearest philosophical statements within Berserk, that the human heart, even when shattered, can continue to beat with a stubborn, fragile dignity. She embodies the truth that brokenness is not the same as corruption, and that suffering does not always twist a soul into something monstrous. While Griffith transcends his humanity and Guts battles the beast within, Casca demonstrates a quieter, more resilient form of endurance, the kind that survives not through strength, but through the refusal to lose the core of what makes one human. Her fragmentation into Elaine is often misread as defeat, but Elaine is not the end of Casca. She is her sanctuary, in a world where memories can maim as thoroughly as blades. The mind sometimes retreats, not because it is weak, but because it still longs to preserve the self beneath the wounds. Elaine emerges as a cocoon, a place where the soul hides from horrors too vast to process. In her silence, there is a kind of sacred resistance, a refusal to let trauma reshape her into something cruel or vengeful. Through Elaine, Casca protects the last intact piece of her humanity by withdrawing it from the brutality of the world. This retreat also reveals one of the most profound truths in Berserk, that healing is not linear, nor is it heroic. It is often small, wordless, and invisible. Casca's survival, bloodied, broken, speechless, becomes an assertion that endurance does not always look like swinging a sword. Sometimes, endurance looks like simply continuing to exist when the world has taken everything from you. And because Casca continues to exist, the possibility of hope continues to exist with her. Her connection to the Moonlight Boy reinforces this theme. Despite the circumstances of his birth, despite the darkness woven into his very being, the child gravitates toward warmth, toward her. He is the living embodiment of a truth Casca proves again and again, that love, even when torn apart, can persist like an echo that refuses to fade. Her tenderness toward him, even in her fragmented state, is a reminder that affection does not need language or memory to survive. It simply needs a heart that still knows how to feel. And Casca's heart, for all it has endured, still knows how to feel. She is the counter-argument to the philosophy that power must be won through the sacrifice of the self. She stands against the idea that ambition requires the abandonment of emotion, or that survival demands the death of empathy. Her existence challenges the logic of both gods and demons, insisting that humanity, flawed, vulnerable, inconsistent, has value not in spite of its fragility, but because of it. In the center of Berserk's violence and despair, Casca becomes an unlikely cornerstone, the reminder that meaning does not come from victory or transcendence, but from relationships, from connection, from the quiet places where love tries again, even after being broken. Through her, the story affirms that tenderness is not a weakness, but a form of strength inaccessible to those who abandon their humanity. At its heart, Berserk is a tale about what happens to people when dreams devour them, or when darkness tempts them. Casca shows us the third path, the path of simply remaining human, even when the world makes that feel impossible. Her survival becomes symbolic of something larger, the endurance of emotion, the persistence of compassion, the refusal of the heart to harden completely. And so, the philosophy that emerges from her life is as gentle as it is painful. A heart can break and still remain human. Silence can be a refuge, not a surrender. Love can persist even when memory cannot. And hope, fragile, flickering hope, needs only one thing to endure. Demons are born from ambition, but hope needs only a heart that still knows how to hurt.